Okay, so for this week, this is the schedule. And we're going to be talking about the readings here in a second. Before doing that, just a reminder that this is the assignment for this week is to, and again, it doesn't have to be very long, but just write 100 and 200 words about these things. We're going to be talking about the little seagull here and also the Sherry Turkle article. But what do you think about comma splices? And we're going to be going over this here in a second. But how would you fix these? And what are some tips and tricks that you would provide? And then also the Sherry Turkle essay, just look at those questions. And I put 523 to 534 just because I think those are the most important pages. But I mean, really, just read the whole article. I think it starts on page 505, and there are some good questions at the end. And so just pick one of those articles and talk about how you would respond to that. And I'm going to show you another video from Sherry Turkle coming up here. But let's talk a little bit about the next paper. And really, when I say the next paper, I'm also even including like the possible final project that you can do for this class. And these are just some reminders. These are some possible topics that you can talk about, you know, physical versus digital books. How is the industry changing in that regard? How do you personally consume reading these days? Is it all online? Do you still prefer the digital books? Also, the athletes and the kneeling controversy. I'm going to talk here about this next bullet point here coming up. Is football safe? Should parents allow their children to play? Because there is some debate about this, because some parents are really concerned that their children want to play football, but it's a very violent and dangerous sport. And I'm going to talk about that here coming up. Also, remember, should college be free? That's going to be an interesting topic, particularly with this debate coming up, because that's one of the issues that's kind of floating around by both parties. Should college debt be eliminated? Should college be free, etc.? Lots of debate on that issue that you could write about. And remember, for all of these topics, it doesn't necessarily matter what position that you take, as long as you defend that position with solid evidence. And remember, for the next paper, I do want you guys to use at least one library resource to help support your opinion, support your argument. And when we get into the final project at the end of the semester, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but you have to basically use about 5 or 6 sources from the library. I don't know at this point if I want to make that like a full paper, especially for the English 1101 class. Probably at this point, it's just going to be an annotated bibliography where I want you guys to do research from sources in the library, good sources, not Wikipedia, not Google search, but library resources, and being able to interpret those sources, because that's really going to be the foundation for your career, the rest of your academic career in college, is being able to find sources, being able to maybe make an argument, but being able to use sources to back up your points, okay? Also, the next bullet point here is overpopulation a world problem? What are some solutions to that? I mean, different theories about that. I mean, if you're Elon Musk, he's talking about eventually moving people to different planets, to Mars, whatever. I mean, it's probably a long ways away, but that's what he's talking about. Is technology limiting creativity? That's a very, very good bullet point here. Very, very good topic that you could write about. We're going to talk a little bit about Sherry Turkle. I probably won't get through all of the essay in this class, but we'll definitely pick that up at least on like next week. And just a reminder too, that on Friday, we're gonna have another bonus session where I'll finish up Robert Cialdini's concepts. And so again, it's just totally optional. It's not mandatory, but it will be good if you want to attend. And Robert Cialdini is just a fantastic author. He is, I mean, he was writing about these concepts in the 1980s, but also the 1990s and the early 2000s. At this point, he's kind of, he's a distinguished retired professor at Arizona State, but a lot of his concepts are still even taught in psychology classes, but even business classes, even though that book was a psychology book. I mean, that's the basis of it. I mean, he cites all kinds of great research from psychologists and things like that, but also it was picked up by a lot of business people because they realized that if you want to influence customers or consumers, a lot of the psychology that Robert Cialdini talks about really makes a difference. And he gives tons of great examples of that. So we'll finish that up on Friday. Our test scores, the most valuable indication of student competence. I tend to agree that it's not really the true indication of students' competence. I mean, I can just tell you from personal experience that some of the best students that I ever had didn't come from great backgrounds and didn't even take the SAT or the ACT, things like that. So, but it's an interesting debate that you could talk about. Does participation in sports keep kids out of trouble? Once again, different perspectives on this that you can argue about. Now, one thing, and we're going to get into the readings here in just a second, but one thing just give me about 5 minutes to talk about this for a second, because this is something that just came up this past weekend. This is a possible paper topic that you could also write about. Professional athletes, or even college athletes, or even high school athletes, and injuries. And there are different perspectives that you could talk about this for a possible paper, because there is this argument out there that with football, especially high school kids, parents want to limit their athletic ability because football is a very violent sport. Now, the thing I just want to touch on real quick, and we'll get into the readings here in a second, but if you're a sports fan, you probably heard, or even if you're not a sports fan, just a lot of you are medical students or going into nursing, you may have seen the Dak Prescott injury, the quarterback for the Cowboys. And here's the thing, I saw the pictures, I didn't see the play, and I don't want to see the play, but I mean, you can see that sports is clearly a violent sport, and there are different perspectives that you could take on that topic. In fact, if we want to use history as an example, if you want to talk about this topic for your next paper, you could talk about the Dak Prescott injury and how it's really disgusting. But you could also talk about Alex Smith, who got injured a couple of years ago. And, you know, when I read this story this past weekend, I thought it was a joke at first. I thought it was hyperbole. And I thought that they were just kind of exaggerating. But that guy had 17 different surgeries to his leg. Okay, 17. And you could also maybe bring up, if you want to go back to like a few years ago. Now, you guys probably don't remember this, but there was also a basketball player from Louisville named Kevin Ware, and just a disgusting injury. In fact, I don't even want to see it anymore. And then also, if you want to go back, you can even talk about like Len Bias, who was a famous basketball player from well, he went to college at Maryland, and I believe that he was the #1 pick in the 1985 draft. He may have been #2 or 3, but he was definitely one of the, I think it was #1 though, the 1985 draft. And he was very, very, pumped up and excited. But he celebrated too hard that night after being the #1 pick in the draft, ended up dying of a cocaine overdose that night. And then you could even go back to Hank Gathers from 1992. He was a player at Loyola Marymount College, and he was projected to be in the top 10. He was a little bit small to be a center. He was probably, I think, 6'8". So that's not really tall enough to be center, but he was still going to be a great player in the NBA. And he literally died on the basketball court because he had a heart condition. In fact, the rumors were that the doctors told him and told his mother that he should not be playing basketball because he had a heart condition. It was very dangerous. And the rumors are that he even stopped taking his medication. I mean, I don't know if that's true, but anyways, though, very, very tragic case. And I mean, you could even talk about that, but the point that I would get to, though, with this possible topic is, what are parents doing for their children at a young age? Do you recommend that they go into sports or not? Because I think that sports do have a very, very positive effect on a lot of kids, but there is always that risk. So that would be a very interesting paper that if you do want to, tackle that issue. Very, very interesting. So also, okay, so let's get into the readings a little bit. The Little Seagull for this week talks about avoiding fragments. And even though we talk in fragments, that's not how we should always be writing. We don't want to use fragments. So take a look here at this first bullet point. The catcher batted 5th, fouled out, ended the inning. Okay, in conversation, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, we all understand what the author is saying, but how could you fix this in terms of MLA style writing? Like, these are fragments. So how could you maybe fix this? Or how could you better phrase that first sentence there? Anyone want to guess? I mean, basically, you could simply put a comma there. The catcher batted 5th, fouled out, ending the inning. So you could literally just put a comma here after 5th. So put a comma here. The catcher batted 5th, fouled out, ended the inning. You could also put a semicolon here after 5th. That's a way to kind of break up two independent clauses. So even though this is not going to be picked up on Microsoft Word, it's not going to give you the error, the little underline red mark or green mark or blue mark or whatever program that you're using. It's not going to give you that underline, but this is an example of two sentences that are fragments that you can kind of combine. So you can add a subject or adding a verb, things like that. And your textbook gives some good examples of that. And okay, so how about this? Your textbook gives this example as well. The first 2 batters walked, Manny Ramirez again. Okay, we understand what the author is saying. In conversation, it makes total sense. I mean, there's no doubt what the author or what the speaker is saying, right? But these are examples of 2 fragmented sentences. How could you maybe change this to put it in better wording, would you say? Any guesses? Well, basically, again, different ways that you could handle this. You could simply put a semicolon right here the first two batters walked, semicolon, Manny Ramirez again. And actually, in this case, they're referring to Manny Ramirez, so you would want to just get rid of that period. The first two batters walked Manny Ramirez again. And actually, as I'm looking at this, yeah, it's just awkwardly worded because Manny Ramirez would be a batter. He wouldn't be a pitcher. So, but it's just kind of awkwardly worded. So one of the reminders that I would just tell everyone is that whenever you're writing a paper, and not just for this class, but I mean just in your future academic classes as well, it always helps to write your draft, put it aside, and then come back a little bit later, and you'll notice like little things like this that you could reword. And also on page 319 of the Little Seagull, they talk about how you can combine fragments. Remember that long sentences are not necessarily your enemy, and you want to avoid fragments. So sometimes you can just, as we go back to this example here, just combine these fragments and figure out ways that you can get rid of this period right here and combine the next clause here. So the catcher batted fifth and foul out, ending the inning. So just like little things like that that you can reword. Microsoft Word's not always going to pick up on these things, but there are different things that you can do to make your sentences a lot better. And also though, one thing I just want to point out is that your textbook also talks about how fragments sometimes can be used intentionally, which is fine, as long as it's clear to the reader that you are using fragments intentionally. That's okay. I mean, just even to start off a paper with a question, like, what is global warming, for instance? Or how are drivers in Orlando bad? Something like that. That would be considered a fragment. But to start off a paper with a question like that sometimes, or it doesn't even have to be a question, but sometimes you can start off a paper with a fragment and it can be okay. So it's just kind of your selection as to how you want to use fragments, but for the most part though, you want to avoid fragments. Also, your textbook gives some more examples of comma splices. And I will tell you that as we continue the semester, I'm going to give you more activities about comma splices and how you can fix them and so forth. But just take a look at this sentence here. T.S. Eliot is best known for his poetry. He also wrote several plays. Okay, what's wrong with that? Why is this a comma splice, and how could you fix this, would you say? Yeah, so Helena, exactly. Change the comma to a semicolon. Exactly, Helena. Yeah, so like you would do this right here. T.S. Eliot is best known for his poetry, semicolon. He also wrote several plays. Or there are other ways that you could change this as well. For example, T.S. Eliot is best known for his poetry. How about this? But a transition word. But he also wrote several plays. So yeah, little things like this that you could change. And then, okay, I don't want you to be too concerned with terminology. Like, what's the difference between a fused sentence and a comma splice? That I don't even care about that. Like, if you know the difference or whatever it might be, but just know how to fix these. So, for example, take a look at this sentence right here. The school board debated the issue, and let me get rid of this here, debated the issue for 3 days. They were unable to reach an agreement. You see here how these are basically two separate sentences. The school board debated the issue for 3 days. Okay, that's one sentence. And then the second sentence would be this: they were unable to reach an agreement. Okay, so different ways that you could fix this. You could say the school board debated the issue for 3 days, and then put a comma here, and then yet they were unable to reach an agreement. So just, little things like this. And I know that this is probably review for a lot of you, but just wanted to emphasize some common mistakes that students make. Okay, and then also on page 321, we're not going to go over all these, but they have different ideas or different ways that you could fix some of these fused sentences or comma splices. Also, okay, the importance of tense. Now, I'll be honest, and I'll even tell you, a class that I had personally, an English class, the professor even told us that you guys misuse tense a lot, but he didn't even care. That's not the main point. And I feel the same way as well. As long as you're getting across the main ideas of what you're trying to say, that's totally fine. I'm not going to be one of these people that line edits everybody and then nitpicks like each little grammar thing or here or there. But just in general though, try to keep the same tense. And Microsoft Word is, again, not going to pick up on some of these things. But how about this sentence? After a week at the beach, we had ate a lot of seafood. What's wrong with this right here? How would you fix this? Exactly, Hunter. We had eaten a lot of seafood. So just little things like this that you can fix. Also, remember to use the active voice when you can. And this is something that, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I'm just going to tell you that the Microsoft Word is not going to pick up on, because grammatically, this makes perfect sense right here. Ancient Greek was studied by many university students in early 20th century. Okay, this is an example of the passive voice. How could you change this to the active voice, do you think? Now remember that with a lot of these examples, it's not like that you have to reword anything. It's just changing the order of some of these words. In this example, you would say that many university students, so you would put this here, you would put this in the front of the sentence. You would say many university students studied ancient Greek in the early 20th century. That's how you could fix this pretty easily, and it would change the passive voice to the active voice. And then take a look at this example here that your textbook gives on page 329. As a teenager, I was instructed on how to behave as a proper señorita. How could you maybe change this to the active voice, do you think? Basically, you would say something like, the teacher or the parent or the professor, but whoever it might be, instructed me on how to behave as a proper señorita. So instead of saying I was instructed, you would say he or she instructed me. So it makes it more of the active voice. Another example here, a lot of people were killed by the earthquake. How would that be changed to make it more of a active voice, do you think? you would just simply say, the earthquake killed a lot of people. So instead of saying a lot of people were killed by the earthquake, just simply rearrange the words to say the earthquake killed a lot of people. And just give me 1 second here. Shoot, okay, I apologize. If our connection disconnects for a short period, just come back. I'm just looking here. I had my hotspot on with my phone and it is not there. And I know that with the place that I'm living at right now, sometimes the connection goes. So if we do disconnect, then don't worry, we'll come right back. Okay, so I just wanted to point that out. Okay, how about this example, the second bullet point? A novel is being read by Sally. How could you change that to the active voice? Exactly, Helena. Sally is reading the novel. So instead of saying a novel is being read by Sally, Sally is reading the novel. It just sounds more active as opposed to passive. And then this last example, the trash was taken out by Anita and tossed in the dumpster before she went to bed. How could you maybe change that to the active voice? Basically, you would just say, Anita tossed the trash in the dumpster before she went to bed. Something like that. And you'll notice that also makes it a little bit more concise. It's more of the active voice. It makes it more concise. Okay, also pay attention to tone. Now, this is kind of more of a subjective thing because, like, listen, there are plenty of great writers through history that use kind of more of an acerbic tone. Like Christopher Hitchens comes to mind. Great, great writer. He passed away a few years ago, but he was a great writer and very, very kind of acerbic, I would say, for lack of a better term. But in general, try to have a tone where you're very respectful. So this is just, again, a random article that I pulled up. This is from A.O. Scott. We'll actually talk about this author probably a little bit later this semester. He's got a great book called like The Joy of Criticism or something like that, where he actually points out that being a critic is a good thing. It's not something that should be feared by anybody. And even though he wasn't like writing this about students and he wasn't writing about your textbook, I think that that's kind of a good theme though, that your textbook says is that they say, I say. What do you say about a different topic? But that's called like the joy of criticism, I think. But just take a look here. I just want to point out a couple things, and I mean, we can go through this whole article, but just a couple things. This is just a random article I literally just pulled up today. And this is about the movie, The Upside of Anger. And a couple of things I just want to point out. Remember that I told you that like papers like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, they tend to have a very respectful tone, meaning that they refer to authors or people just as Ms. or Mr. Not that you need to do that. I mean, don't do that actually, but that's just kind of the respectful tone that they have. But I just wanted to point this out about like the opening paragraph here. Remember that long sentences are not always run-on sentences. And this is an example of this. And you'll notice that A.O. Scott, he starts off the article by saying, The Upside of Anger, written and directed by Mike Bender, is a seriously flawed movie wrapped around two nearly perfect performances. Okay, so that's a good opening hook, actually, when you think about it. I mean, just imagine this as an essay. That kind of gets your attention right away, that this movie is a seriously flawed movie wrapped around two nearly perfect performances, okay? But I want to point your attention to the second sentence here. This looks, when you just look at the length of it, this looks like a long sentence. But actually, it's not a run-on sentence because the way that he uses commas to separate ideas. I mean, if this didn't have any commas, like right here, after affair or after shaky or after ease, it would read like a run-on sentence. But the way that it's written, and keep in mind, you know, A.O. Scott is Harvard educated, so I mean, he's just a great writer in general, but the way that this is written makes total sense. Joan Allen and Kevin Costner play a pair of drifting suburban neighbors whose last resort companionship blossoms into an unlikely love affair, comma. And though the movie's premise is shaky, its story thin, and its surprise twist ending in utter catastrophe, the two stars bring such ease, wit, and conviction to the roles that this awkward, underwritten attempt to blend midlife romantic comedy, domestic melodrama almost works in spite of itself. And then again, I'm not going to go through this whole article, but just the tone that this is written in, the style that it's written is very, very impressive. Okay. Moving on here. Let's talk a little bit more about Sherry Turkle. Now, I'm going to show you a clip. I showed you guys a clip of Sherry Turkle on Monday. I think that this is a different interview where she's giving a different TED Talk. We're not going to watch the whole thing anyways, but I just want to show you a little bit more about Sherry Turkle, and then we'll start talking about her. And as I'm saying this, I'm going to shift my computer to a different room just because I'm running out of power. So, but in the meantime, let's take a look here at this.
Assembled the greatest minds in computer science, really at the time, to figure out the question of what people might want to do with what was then called home computers. The word personal computers really hadn't come into the lexicon yet. Now, these were the first computers that you didn't have to build. These were the first computers that you could actually buy. And these great computer scientists got together. I was invited to the meeting because I had begun my studies of computers and people. They got together and they kind of gave it their best shot. Somebody suggested that children might want to learn to program, listen to respectfully, maybe. Somebody suggested that we would want to put our address books on computers, and people laughed and said, well, actually, paper and pencil little books, paper was perfect for that because most people didn't have a database. They had a couple of names and addresses. So that didn't make a lot of sense. Some people suggested, well, a calendar. And actually, people said, well, no, I don't like using the computer for my calendar. I really find little file of facts is much better. You can flip through. It's much more practical. I tell this story because I think it's very important to know, to remember, that really not that long ago, we were trying to figure out how we would keep computers busy. And, now we know that once we networked with each other, once computers were our portal to being with each other, we really don't have to worry about keeping computers busy. They keep us busy. It's kind of as though we are their killer app. So how does that work? We're on our email, our games, our virtual worlds. We text each other at family dinners, while we jog, while we drive. We take our lives into our hands to do that, even with our kids in the back seat of the car. We text each other at funerals. We go to the park and we push swings with one hand and we scroll through our messages with each other. A lot of my research is observing families, and this is what I see. The children who I interview say that their parents read them Harry Potter, again with that right hand reading them the book and the left hand scrolling through the messages on the BlackBerry. Children describe that moment at school pickup. They'll never tell you that they care, but they describe that moment where they come out of school, looking for that moment of eye contact. And instead of that moment of eye contact with a parent who, after all, has shown up at school pickup, that parent is looking at the iPhone, looking at the smartphone, and is reading mail. So from the moment this generation of children met technology, it was the competition. And now they've grown up. And today's teenagers, this generation of children who've grown up with technology being the competition, they now have their turn to live in the culture of distraction. And what do they tell me? They tell me that they sleep with their cell phones. They begin by saying, well, I use it as an alarm clock, and then they come clean and they say, well, actually, it's not just because I use it as an alarm clock. They want to sleep with it just in case they get a message or they want to communicate. And then they say that even when their phones are put away, let's say relegated to their school locker, they know when they have a message or a call. They feel that they can tell at long distance that they have a message or a call. They say they can just sense it. Indeed, adults as well as teens report that they feel their phones vibrating, even when they are not. This is a well-known phenomenon. It's called the phantom ring. It's been reported all over. When you take our phones away from us, we become anxious. We become impossible, really. Modern technology has become like a phantom limb. It is so much a part of us. So what is the arc of the story that I want to tell? Only 15 years ago, looking at the early internet, I felt an incredible sense of optimism. I saw a place for identity experimentation. I called it an identity workshop for trying out aspects of self that were hard to experiment with in the physical real. And all of this happens, and all of this is still wondrous. But what I didn't see coming, and I like to tell my students, call me not prescient. What I didn't see coming, and what we have now, is that mobile connectivity, that world of devices, always on and always on us, would mean that we would be able to basically bail out of the physical real at any time to go to all of the other places and spaces that we have available to us and that we would want to. One man I interviewed who plays with his kids in the park while he talks to his virtual mistress on iPhone calls it the life mix. So I guess you could say that what I'm talking about are the perils of going from multitasking to multi-lifing, the perils of the life mix. Technology proposes itself as the architect of our intimacies, and these days there is no coyness about its aspiration to substitute.
Okay, so you get the idea there. And Sherry Turkle's article for this week that you're reading, if you haven't read it already, is from her book called Alone Together. Now, I tend to think this book is a little bit too long, and I think she kind of goes off on some tangents a little bit. She's probably best known for a book from 1995 called Life on the Screen. And as she says here in this video, it was very prescient, meaning that she was able to kind of predict what would happen with the internet. And in that book, though, Alone Together, she basically says that the whole book is kind of a love letter to her daughter. And her daughter was a college-age student, just like a lot of you guys. And what Sherry Turkle says in that book is that her daughter is kind of growing up in this new generation where technology is kind of taking us over a little bit. Now, keep in mind as well that and give me 1 second here. I'm going to switch rooms again. Hold on 1 second. I think I'm good here. So later this semester, remember that Friday's class is just going to be kind of a bonus class where I want to finish up on Robert Cialdini's concepts. But I'm thinking that next week, or if not next week, the week after, I'm going to introduce you to this idea of media literacy. Now, this is a class that it's really like a 3.5 hour class, so we're not going to be able to finish it in one day. So it'll carry over to the next week. But in that class, I'm going to show you an interview with Sherry Turkle, or at least part of an interview. I mean, it's a documentary that Frontline did, but she even says that, no, she's not anti-technology at all. She's very pro-technology, but she just advocates that we use a little bit of caution when we use technology. So I'll be giving you guys that lecture in a bonus class here coming up. But let me just ask you guys, and just feel free to type in the chat box or hit the talk button. What do you guys think about this issue? Do you have the same relationship with your loved ones that you did before? Now, keep in mind, I'm older than I assume probably everybody in this class. I'm 41, but I remember the time where we didn't always use cell phones. So the relationships that we had with people close to us were a lot different than the ways that we interact now. But just out of curiosity, just even go back to your teen days. Before you had a cell phone, were your relationships with your friends and family a little bit different than they are now, when everybody texts and so forth? Like, just what do you guys think about that? Any thoughts on that? I mean, very, very interesting dynamic between, I guess, pre-cell phones and post-cell phones. And then also, I know that most everybody, I assume, okay, and Hunter says that, okay, so Hunter says, I think my relationship is about the same, if not more. And that's actually a good point when you think about it. I mean, excellent point, Hunter, because, you know, being able to text your friends all the time, you're able to kind of connect with them more. I mean, like, for a lot of you that have friends or family in different states, you really don't communicate with them face to face. I mean, it's just simply impossible these days. So being able to use technology, being able to call or text, actually makes the relationships a lot stronger, you could argue. And then also, the second bullet point here, I know that for the most part, probably everyone in this class, I think is, well, most people in the class, I think, are here in Orlando. And of course, obviously you were expecting to take your classes this semester face-to-face, which of course that didn't happen because of the virus, unfortunately. But I do know that some of you, in fact, I'm not sure if she's here right now, but Ms. Golden, I think, I'm not sure if she's in this class, but I know that she's like in Texas. So it's great that, and by the way, I'm taking classes at Murray State, their doctorate program online. I took this semester off, but I'm going to be doing it again next semester. So it's great that we can take classes in distant locations, you know, so that's great. But let me just ask you, for those of you that might be in different states, do you still have the same communication with your family, with your friends? I can just give you, again, a personal example. You know, I used to teach at Full Sail University, and if you're familiar with Full Sail University, basically they've become pretty much an online school. I mean, when I started back in 2006, they were mostly, I mean, I was actually part of the first class that they ever had that was an online class. But when I first started there in 2006, it was pretty much all face-to-face classes, right? Now they've kind of changed their whole atmosphere, their whole environment. It's basically all online. But what's interesting is that for a number of years, I taught in one of the online programs, and you have to understand that students in that program were all from different locations, different states. They literally never met anybody at all. Like they didn't know each other, but they were colleagues for 13 months. I think 12 months was well, actually, no, it was 13 months, the program. And they were interacting with their fellow colleagues, but they had never seen each other face to face. So what was interesting is that when we had graduations, they were meeting their colleagues and also the faculty for the very first time. So it was just a really interesting situation. So it's good that technology can do certain things. I mean, take classes online and so forth. But it is interesting, I think, that Sherry Turkle points out. Do you think, like this first bullet point here, right here that Sherry Turkle talks about on page 505, do you think that our culture would benefit sometimes, at least, from less technology, maybe in certain situations, do you think? I know that Hunter just said that his relationship is about the same, if not more, and that's an excellent point. But look at this bullet point here. Do you think that our culture would benefit sometimes with less technology? I mean, yes, in some forms, Hunter says. And just to kind of give you a tangible, real world example, I know that a lot of you are going to be like nursing students going into the medical field. I will just tell you that one thing that doctors are finding, and keep in mind, as I say this, a lot more research still needs to go into this. So I don't want to make like a blanket statement like this is always true. But one of the theories out there, one of the things that a lot of scientists and a lot of doctors are finding is that if you look at Alzheimer's disease, it's becoming at least more evident that some of it might be because of technology. The fact that we don't have to memorize driving directions anymore because we all have apps like Waze and things like that. We don't have to memorize phone numbers. So it has a perhaps tangible effect on our memories. The fact that we don't have to memorize things because we just look at our phones and we can see our friend's phone number or our family's member's phone number, and we don't even have to memorize it anymore. And it's, again, in the early stages of research right now, but what they're thinking is that that might actually later in life contribute to Alzheimer's disease. So that would be an interesting topic for a paper if you guys wanted to pursue that. But again, a lot of more research has to go into this to have like a definitive explanation about this. But it's intriguing nonetheless. Let me ask you guys this second bullet point. Obviously, this is a peculiar semester because we're all taking online classes, and so it's not face-to-face, but just in general, what do you think about this question? Do you prefer online classes or in-person classes? And what are some of the advantages of each could be? I mean, I will tell you guys that once again, a personal situation. Yeah, so exactly. Cindy says. In person can be more hands-on, and that's crucial for a lot of classes that are tech heavy, where you need to be using the technology. And I assume that most everybody's probably a freshman here. So you probably, I don't even know if you guys have been to the Altamont campus, but in the Altamont campus, we have computers in every classroom. So in any time that we need to do a lab activity, and I'm not just talking about English classes, but I mean, I'm just talking about like math classes, for instance. Anytime that there needs to be a lab where students need to get hands-on learning, that's very, very helpful. And as Helena says, sometimes it just depends on the subject. So very, very interesting. I can just tell you too, that the attitude of this has changed a lot. Once again, from personal experience, I'll just tell you that students who were forced to take online classes, and once again, not just to keep bringing up Full Sail University, but when I taught at Full Sail, they changed our class at one point to completely online. And students hated it because it's like, they're already here in Orlando. Why, and they're already taking all their other classes in person. Why do they now have to take an online class when they're in the same location? It doesn't make any sense. So a lot of students didn't like that. The attitude, I think, is changing a little bit because let's say that, and then Hunter says, I think for online is very well, it helps me manage my time better, but some classes out there would probably be better if they were in person. And Hunter, I think that you're absolutely correct. I mean, the advantages of an online education is, or some of the advantages are that you can do things on your own pace, your own schedule. You know, you do have your deadlines, of course, but it's not like, and speaking of like you guys right here in this class, I realize that sometimes people can't always make it on time. They have other obligations, they have work obligations, they have, you know, something comes up. That's why we always post the YouTube video. I always post the YouTube video right after so that you can check out the class on your own time. So I think that online and face-to-face classes both have their advantages and disadvantages. Let me ask you guys about this right here. Do you think that texting kind of depersonalizes us at times? And give me a second here, I'm gonna switch rooms again. So just give me 1 second here. But what do you guys think about this bullet point here? Does texting sometimes depersonalize us, do you think? I mean, I think that what Sherry Turkle says is that it does. I mean, even though obviously texting has advantages, yes, and actually, Carrie, with romantic relationships, I was just about to go here. Let me actually, I tell you what, just for the sake of time, I don't want to go into all these slides today. We'll kind of save that for next week. But just as Carrie's point was, let me ask you guys this. Has anybody broken up with a significant other online rather than doing it face-to-face? Yeah, you know, it's interesting. Now, Sherry Turkle also in that book, she talks about, well, actually, I'm not sure if it's in Alone Together or if it's Life on the Screen, but in one of those books, she actually gives examples of how people not only break up online, but they actually meet online and have relationships online. It seems totally bizarre. I mean, I don't know how you could have like a significant other that's just in different states and that you never see them, but she gives examples of that. And I will just tell you, that one thing that she talks about too is how, well, she goes into like robots and things like that. But one example I was just going to mention, and again, this is not a sports class, so I don't want to keep going into sports, but I will tell you that there was a football player from Notre Dame, and I forget his name offhand. I forget his name offhand, but some of you probably remember what I'm talking about. He actually had a relationship with, supposed relationship with some woman who was out of state. And then there was a big thing because she got cancer or died, or her mother died or something like that. It was a huge thing in the sports world because everybody at Notre Dame, they were talking about how sorry they felt for him. And it turns out that it was complete catfish, meaning that he never met her. The woman didn't exist. It was some guy, basically, whenever they talked, I guess, performing a woman's voice, and he got totally tricked. But I think that's kind of a good, yes, Bryce, yes, you're absolutely right. It's Manti Te'o, exactly. Thank you for, I totally forgot his name. Yeah. So thank you, Bryce, for pointing that out. But this kind of points out what Sherry Turkle is talking about, is that our relationships are increasingly online these days. So very, very interesting. And I tell you what, for some reason, my charger is not working on my computer. We'll pick up on some of these slides next time, because really Sherry Turkle's article talks about a lot of the other essays in the book, or it really comments on some of the other essays in the book. But I tell you what, my computer right now is at 7%, and it's even plugged in, so I'm not sure exactly. I guess I need to just close it down here. And now it's at 5%. So listen, before I run out of time, we'll pick up on this next time. Remember that Friday's class will be just optional. It won't be mandatory. But before I wrap up here, and before my computer dies here in a second, I think it's actually the plug that it's plugged into. It's not the cord, but anyways, though, before we wrap up, does anybody have any questions here? Remember that this will be on YouTube. I'm going to post the link to this later on today. Unfortunately, with YouTube, sometimes the processing works immediately, and then sometimes it takes a while, but this will definitely be up a little bit later today. And once again, I just want to thank everybody for attending. If you guys do have any questions about the assignments for this week, or if you have any ideas for a paper that you're floating around. Yes, so real quickly, so Selena had a question about the essay. I remember you said we could write about a movie or author, but what if I did a book? Absolutely, that would be great, Selena. In fact, I mean, just to give you some ideas, I mean, in the past, I've had students write about the Harry Potter books and their impact on society and just how well they're written and so forth. I've had students write about Stephen King books. You know, It comes to mind that one student wrote about. So yeah, that would be totally okay. So I just want to thank everybody for attending, and just keep up the great work. I was even telling a colleague the other day that this class is really, really good. And obviously, I know that you guys are dealt with a difficult situation this semester where a lot of you were expecting to have face-to-face classes. Unfortunately, we can't always do that, but just keep in mind that a vaccine is coming. I think it's actually going to be available in a few weeks. Unfortunately, it's not going to be something that everybody's going to have access to immediately. So I have to kind of break the bad news to you. And again, I don't want to say anything that's set in stone here. So don't quote me on that. But it's looking like the classes next semester are probably going to be online again. That's just because not everybody's going to have access to the vaccine immediately. So I know that a lot of you want to have face-to-face classes, unfortunately, but I don't think that it's necessarily going to happen. But again, I just want to thank everybody for attending. Keep up the great work. Let me know if you have any questions. Let me know if you have any questions about possible topics for the next paper that you're thinking of. Selena just had a great question about if she wants to write a paper about a certain book. That would be totally fine. The only requirements for next semester are that, or for the next paper, really, are that you have to have at least one source from the library. Okay, so once again, thanks everybody for attending. This will be up later today, and I have to cut this real short because my computer now is at 4%, so I apologize for that. But we'll hope to see everybody maybe on Friday for the bonus session or for next week for sure. So thanks everybody for attending. Have a great rest of the day and a great rest of the week, basically. So we'll see you later.